Women who gave the creep a chance, how did it go? I ignored my gut feeling about him, overlooked his strange tendencies and tried to give him the benefit of the doubt. We were together for almost 2 years. The entire relationship, he added girls he didn't even know on Snapchat and would say rather inappropriate things to them. Being that you know nothing about strangers on that app, I'm now aware that one of the girls was a minor. He was 26. On my 22nd birthday he had invited my best friend to sleep in our bed with us, and the first time he met my sister he gave her the same invitation. He gave both of those invitations right in front of my face. When we were out together and he saw someone attractive he wouldn't just glance, he stared. He regularly talked poop on my family, and is just generally an awful person. I was his first real girlfriend and he was / extremely self-centered and mentally abusive. That ended almost a year ago and he still goes to our regular hangouts and asks about me, when I come in, where I'm living, who I'm seeing, etc. My takeaway from that whole situation is, always trust your gut feeling about people. I agreed to go on a date with a guy. He seemed nice enough and he appeared to have his poop together. After an hour at the pub, I was getting some red flags and I said I needed to make a move and he walked me to my car. He then got in my car with me and begged me to go back to his. I politely declined at first but he wasn't getting out so I started to get more scared. After about 20 minutes of insisting I come back to his I was terrified. So I secretly texted my mate to call me with an emergency. 5 seconds later she called and said she got stuck in a puddle and needed my help. I love this girl. So I told him I really needed to go and after getting quite angry he finally got out and slammed my car door. Unfortunately I went on another date a year later with a different guy and again he got in my car and tried to kiss me. I just leant on my horn, wound my windows down and screamed like a crazy person. Luckily he got the message and left swiftly. Guys, please don't just get in the girl's car, it's creepy and scary AF. There was a guy that came into my restaurant, a few times a week for lunch. He did this for a little over a month so he became a regular. He had asked me out every time I brought his bill. He always asked in a light-hearted way and never seemed upset or anything when I turned him down. I assumed that after the first few asks, he maybe thought of it as more of an inside joke at that point. Like he was just asking now to make light of the previous rejections and to make it less awkward or something. He always gave me weird vibes but seemed nice enough so I thought I might have just been making assumptions because of his appearance and wasn't being fair. One time that he asked, I decided randomly to agree and give him a shot. Why not, I thought. He was always super kind and I had gotten rather used to the awkwardness I felt being around him. He seemed so excited and I asked him to leave his number on the receipt and I would call/text him when I wasn't busy to set something up. So it wasn't really much of a joke to keep asking me out, I mostly figured that though TBH. A few days later I hadn't texted him yet to set anything up or even give him my number and I get a text only a few minutes after walking into my house after I got home from work. It said, "Hey. It's from. I know it's a long shot but I'm free tonight and bored, wanna hang out? If you're free that is." I asked him how he got my number. He said I gave it to him the night I agreed. I absolutely know I didn't. I got really creeped out but decided not to confront him about it and just play like I'm a ditz and believe that I must have done that, I just didn't remember because it was busy. I told him that I wasn't free to hang out that night, that I was going to be working later to help cover a shift and then would be pretty pooped by the time I was off. I only ever saw him come in for lunch, not ever dinner shifts. A few minutes passed before he responded. He said, "Why are you lying to me?" I just responded with what? Lol. He said, "I know you were home. If you didn't want to hang out tonight you could have just said so." Alarm bells rang in my head. I thought, there's no way he's outside my house. He is just trying to call my bluff. Creepy but not a full-blown stalker. But I felt exposed. I felt the crawling on my skin that only burns into you when someone is staring at you. The vulnerable pulses that are felt only by prey. I looked out through the blinds of my bedroom and he was parked right outside my house. I could see his face lit up by the phone screen. He was so close. I texted him and said, "Ahaha, you caught me. How did you know I was bluffing? I'm sorry. I do want to hang out soon, I'm just not feeling up to it tonight." And called 911. The police showed up and went up to his car and talked to him for a bit. He drove away a few minutes later and then the officers came to my door. They told me that they acted like a random neighbor complained about a strange car. They didn't implicate anyone but made it seem like it was an older person, so probably not me. They took his plate information but asked him politely to move so he didn't upset anyone in the neighborhood and he complied. I went to my friend's house that night and filed a restraining order the next morning. I later found out that he most likely got my number from the shift sheet behind the hostess counter, because several co-workers had seen him, at different times, snooping back there and kindly stopped him. He, I guess, grabbed a roll of silverware claiming that the server hadn't left him any and he didn't want to bother anyone because he knew they were busy, so just grabbed it himself. This stopped anyone from suspecting him of anything odd. And that his car had been parked at my house almost every night, neighbor's security camera. I don't know how he got my address, but I assume he must have followed me. He must have been full on stalking me for a while. He did come into my work a day or two later for lunch acting like everything was normal. I immediately went and got my manager and she informed him that he had a restraining order against him preventing him from eating there because he would be in violation of it. I had already changed my phone number, so I don't know if he tried to text me, and I didn't sleep at my house for weeks, but I never saw him again after that. And I often find myself thinking back to that time and wondering how much more did he do and for how long that I don't know about. Like, maybe he stalked me long before he started coming into the restaurant, and only started coming in there because he felt more brave than before to interact with me. How much of my private moments throughout my life were actually not private? Also, I have never once stopped feeling scared that he might have still stalked me and knows where I am even now, but is keeping himself hidden. I doubt it, but the fear is still there. I have never felt comfortable being alone. Ever. Most of this would have still probably happened even if I didn't agree to give him a chance. But if he hadn't slipped up about having my phone number when he shouldn't, I would have gone out somewhere with him, and who knows how badly that could have ended. If your gut feeling tells you he's a creep, then he is most definitely a creep. Don't let the nice guys guilt trip and gaslight you into doubting your own intuition with their narrative. There was a guy, who I wasn't sure about. There had been signs. After a couple normal dates, he wanted to take my Jeep to a local off-road location that had a main rutty road with many offshoots with hill climbs and mud pits. He bugged me to drive it. I told him he could only take it down the main off-road, but while we were bouncing, straddling ruts, chugging along just fine, he suddenly gunned it up an almost vertical climb off the main road, and rolled us into a ditch on our side. The tires weren't on the ground, so no way to get it out. Then, he acted like it was no big deal. I had to walk to my uncle's house, which happened to be on a road near the off-road location. He wasn't home, but his girlfriend was, so I called a couple people and couldn't get a hold of anyone. As a last resort, I called one of my best friends from childhood, a guy friend, which we did briefly date for a while before deciding to just remain friends, the only person I could get a hold of with a vehicle that could potentially pull my Jeep out. The creepy guy had no ideas besides to leave it there on its side. He had a total fit, and made a big scene. My friend from childhood helped me pull the dents out and fix it while the creepy guy walked off into the sunset. The dude in the flat across from mine started off as a really nice guy. Introduced himself, offered meals when he'd cooked too much. Just a great guy all round. Within a few weeks, it was made clear that he was an alcoholic. I have a recovering brother, so I really sympathized with him. I went out of my way to sit with him, and eventually called him an ambulance when he fitted from withdrawals, UK, so calling an ambulance is free. This carried on for a little while, with me sitting with him 2 or 3 times a week, waiting for an ambulance. One night after he started fitting, he kept grabbing my breasts. I was already on the phone to the ambulance service, but the woman heard me telling him to stop and sent police as well. He was carted off, and just like usual, I grabbed his keys and told him to knock for them the next morning. Well, the NRXT time I looked after him, the groping got worse. And then slowly so did my life. Suddenly I had fires set outside my windows, and mutilated rat corpses left on my doorstep. The police were called after every incident, and I got to know one policeman who was put on my case really well. He suggested I put up cameras, so I did. There was footage of the neighbor standing outside in the yard at 3 a.m., just staring into my window, multiple nights in a row. Terrifying, but not illegal. Well, 2 weeks after that, my neighbor snapped. There were builders in the garden next to ours, and they apparently woke him up at 4 p.m. He ran out with a kitchen knife and stabbed 2 of the builders and the neighbor's dog. Everyone survived. He also slashed a whole bunch of tires on our street. When the police came to search the dude's flat, my policeman friend told me, off the books, that the neighbor had been faking being an alcoholic the entire time. He'd get in the ambulance, ride to the hospital, and then check himself out and walk home. Also, they found half a dozen decomposing rats in his bathtub. They'd been mutilated. They later found a bloody hammer under his bed. You'd think him being arrested would be the end of it, but no. He put my name, picture, address, and telephone number on a prostitution site. I had men aggressively hounding me for sex multiple times an hour for 2 entire weeks before I just cut all ties and fled the city. Last I heard, he was in jail for the GBH, but that was a few years ago now. Yeah. Never gonna make the same mistake again. He stalked me for almost 8 months, and I still do not want to know how he got my address. I was 19, he was 31. God, I was so naive. He was older than me, wouldn't respect boundaries, pressured me to do things, texted hundreds of times a day, then the next day completely iced me out. Phoned 10 to 14 times one afternoon. I tried the same thing back to him. He screamed at me to never call him again. Later threatened self-harm if I didn't talk to him. Harassed me at work. Turns out he was married the whole time, but they were separated? Wanted me to go in the woods with him one day. I walked, ran away as fast as I could. Back in high school, several of my female friends and I, also female, had an off period before lunch, so we were all sitting around a table chatting. One of the female security guards came up to us and told me that there was a new exchange student from Amsterdam that thought I was cute, but he was too nervous to come over and introduce himself. I have zero interest in men, but I figured there wasn't any harm in letting the guy come sit with us and helping him feel more comfortable at our school. So he comes over, sits down with us, and chats a bit. He seemed rather shy, and he had about a dozen piercings going up each arm that he kept fiddling with, and a bunch of facial piercings. Then class lets out and people, including a bunch of my male friends, start showing up for lunch. First male friend sits down and introduces himself. New guy doesn't not respond at all, doesn't even look at friend. Weird. Maybe just shy? Second male friend comes and sits down. Same thing. Slightly unsettling now. We kept trying to include him over lunch, but he would only respond to the women. Wouldn't even acknowledge the other guys at the table. I never talked to him again after that lunch period, and 2 weeks later he got expelled for slamming a girl against a locker and choking her to the point she nearly passed out. Guy had serious untreated mental health problems, which resulted in him spending 4 years stalking me and making me resent giving that one chance. I made multiple calls to police and paramedics because he would call me up threatening suicide unless I would help him. He still finds me on social medias and random gaming apps to say hi, I miss you, but I now live more than 1,000 kilometers away. Met him when I worked as a cashier in a small downtown shop. Wasn't my type and seemed a little off, but I was young and had zero real dating experience. Agreed to grab coffee as a friend and made it clear I didn't have a romantic interest. He became convinced he was Gatsby and I was his Daisy. The Great Gatsby film had just come out that year. Started stalking me and endlessly sending letters and gifts to me at work describing how we were fated to be together. When I confronted him to stop, he started having his friends follow me at work or drop by to check in on me. Prowled outside on nights I had to close shop alone. I ended up quitting that job and things fizzled. 7 months later I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the same dude. He just got released from a short prison sentence and was letting me know he thought of me every day and was going to find me so we could finally be together. I made up a story that I was traveling abroad for college and would be gone indefinitely. Changed my number and luckily haven't heard from him again. Did one video chat with him during which he asked if he could, video, call me again later in the day. When I told him no, I'll be busy, I started getting random text messages throughout my day that said, "Are you okay? Just let me know you're okay." The first I responded to, I said, "Hey, yeah, I'm fine. I just hung up with you 30 minutes ago, bud." He took that as a sign that I wanted to talk more, so he attempted another video call. When I didn't respond, he started again with the texts. Didn't even bother responding to the rest. Up to 20 unread messages later before I was able to block him while leaving him on read. Reading this I realized I actually have something to contribute. I gave him a chance in high school. I was 15, he was 18. Ended with him sticking his tongue down my throat several times quite aggressively, joking about stabbing me as he lunged a knife at me and laughed about it while carving pumpkins, and threatened to shoot up the school with a list of names, my friend and I's being top of the list. He got suspended and no one ever saw him again. Update, my friends and I found out he's now in the military. Knew he was weird before the first date. I was sad and thought maybe he'd be different in person. Showed up to the date and he walked with a crazy limp, told me he was into pee stuff, wouldn't pay for dinner, tried to kiss me 3 times. When I got home that night he sent me a full body nude completely out of the blue. I never saw him again. He texted me 3 months later to tell me I was the worst human and most selfish person he's ever met. And then he blocked me. Went on a first date for just drinks with a guy, and red flags were immediate. Didn't look anything like his profile, and got handsy almost as soon as we sat down. I wasn't into him at all, but we had a shared interest in horror novels, so I decided to extend the date into dinner. During dinner, he drank several old fashions while I nursed a single beer. He then told me he thought we were soulmates, and he thought we were going to fall in love. He also told me his ex-girlfriend was going to get an abortion the next day. At the end of the date, his portion of the bill was significantly more than my portion because of all his drinks, but he asked me to pay half, which I did. On top of that, he gave me poop for driving to the date even though it was only a mile from my house. I didn't want to walk in hot weather in my nice date dress and I had twisted my ankle earlier that week. But even after giving me poop for driving, he asked me to give him a lift home. Which I did. Once we were in front of his place, he refused to get out of my car unless I went inside with him for a nightcap. I said absolutely not. He begged me to just enjoy a drink on his front porch. I said no. I told him to get out of my car. He finally did. The next day, he texted me telling me that was the best date he'd ever had and he couldn't wait to see me again. I told him no, thank you, and walked away with one lesson learned. I need to just say no from the beginning. This guy was handsome but way too into me for knowing nothing about me. It wasn't like when we spoke I was an open book or felt a strong connection that would lead me to want to share info with him. This was not a I feel like I've known this man forever connection. I just thought this was normal dating but had a gut feeling something was off. He talked to me like I'd been his girlfriend for months. We went on 3 dates, never even had sex. After third date I had made my decision based on our short time getting to know one another and let him know I had no interest in continuing to date and that I didn't see us being compatible long term. He then locked me in his car, proceeded to ask if I wanted to move to California with him, WTF, and started crying/begging me to work this out. I tried to be very nice but it got to the point I was scared and wasn't sure how this was going to go since he was virtually a stranger, so I hit his dashboard and said if he didn't let me out of the car immediately I was calling the police. Then he threatened to kill himself if I didn't spend the night with him at his house. I'd never even been to this man's house. He finally let me out after like an hour or two but stayed in the parking lot of my apartment almost the entire night and called me non-stop. About a month later he texted me out of the blue a really long paragraph apologizing profusely and saying if I ever changed my mind to call him. I just said thanks for the apology and wished him well. Hope he's doing okay but I wanted no part of that. A few years ago, I went to a brewery to meet a guy on a date for the first time. The waiter began a conversation and asked me if I was expecting anyone else. I told him I was on a blind date and hadn't met the guy before. The waiter asked me if I wanted to set up a code word. Since they didn't serve milk stouts, if I ordered one from him, he would know something is up and would call me back to have me sign the receipt instead. The waiter kept checking on me frequently. Eventually, I did order a milk stout. When it came time for the bill, I asked for it to be split. My date put his drinks on my bill. When the waiter came back, he told me he had the drinks removed, it was on the house. When my date asked me what that was all about, I told him the waiter had told me there was something wrong with my card, so I needed to go to bar with him. I waited a while and then left for my car. The date was still there. He made a comment about how he was waiting for a goodbye hug. I told him, no, thank you, and that my car was in the opposite direction. Moments later, he sent me horrendous text messages. And thank you, John. You may have saved my life that day. I bought him a coffee one time and we chatted about our music tastes. 3 days later, I was sitting in my dorm and I got a text from him that was just a selfie. I sent one back and the conversation got really boring, so I sent him a snap of a black screen. He responded, "Are you in a dark place?" And I said, "Yeah, lol." His response was, "Well, you'll have to leave soon because you have class in, insert building with insert professor, at 6 o'clock. I literally never told him anything about my classes, so he just effing stalked me until he learned my entire schedule. It turns out he was a serial creep preying on freshman girls.